Ladies and gentlemen, friends, countrymen, comrades, compañeros, this is not Joe Fortunato. This is Eric Cohn, his much better looking and clearly more intelligent co-host. And this is the 80th episode of Blueshirt Bandwidth. You know, I never pointed out to Joe, but he adds an S that is not in the title of this podcast every time he says it. And like we're getting to the point with Joe where there are so many malapropisms that like I just feel I have to pick my battles. Malapropisms and mispronunciations. And I really feel I have to pick my battles on which ones to point out. And I'm just going to assume one of two things is going to happen here, Chip. Either Joe will listen to this episode and he will now know that there is no S in Blueshirt Bandwidth. Or he's not going to listen to the episode, and I'm going to save it for the 100th episode of the show to point out to him. So one of those two things is going to happen.
My money is on Joe not listening because Joe doesn't listen.
Yes, I think we've very clearly established that. No, Joe is on a cruise, I believe, probably threatening a very otherwise friendly captain that he is the captain now because that is a movie reference that he will probably not get, and that makes me happy. I would have gone with a Titanic movie reference, but I feel like he could fake if he hadn't seen Titanic. I'm pretty sure he knows how it ends. Although, Chip, I swear to you, this is a true story. When I saw it in the theater, somebody walking out said, quote, "I didn't know it was going to be a disaster film."
For fuck's sake.
Yeah. So I look.
That is an indictment of our education system.
Could have been getting trolled. If there were people really doing trolling in 1997. But I've been something else that will really have no impact on Joe. I have been listening to episodes of the Rewatchables, the Bill Simmons podcast, and they just did an episode on LA Confidential, which is a much better movie than Titanic, and arguably should have been the best picture of 1997. But of course, Titanic. Back at a time, and I think we can kind of celebrate this, back at a time when it could be a major box office success and Best Picture. So I have a little line of sympathy for Titanic in that sense, that the Academy Awards should feel okay honoring films that are massively popular and that not have just been seen by 8 people, all of them Academy voters.
LA Confidential had such a great cast. Such a great cast top to bottom. It was ridiculous how good that. I love rewatching that movie.
What's amazing too is that Cromwell is like really the only at the time, and DeVito, I guess, Danny DeVito, are the only two people who are really famous and prominent. Like the biggest star. Which actor got top billing for that movie? Do you remember?
Was it Kim Basinger?
I'm pretty sure it was Spacey.
Was it? Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Space. It's another one of those two where it's like, Kevin Spacey may be an awful human being, but he's an amazing actor.
Yep.
And you're right, but everybody's performance in that is great. Guy Pearce is fantastic. It was early Russell Crowe. Apparently he was told by James Ellroy that his character didn't drink. So Russell Crowe didn't drink for the entire production of that movie, which apparently led to two things. One, him being a terror, and two, him being in pretty good physical condition by the end of the film.
Yeah. I forget, was that before or after American Beauty? Because that would explain Spacey. That was before American Beauty?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, just a fantastic film that everybody should go check out. Everybody should also go check out BlueshirtBanter.com. $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free access to the New York Rangers, including really great pieces like we have one up. We're recording on Wednesday. One up today from Keegan on remembering the Battle of Connecticut. Of course, the Bridgeport Islanders are leaving Bridgeport. The Islanders affiliate is moving to Canada. So tonight will be the last time that the Hartford Wolfpack and the Bridgeport Islanders will match up against each other. We've got a whole lot of other stuff coming too, of course, with the end of the season. Again, it is Wednesday. The Rangers will play the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 82nd and final game of the regular season tonight. And we'll have a lot that is coming in the coming weeks. We're going to have report cards covering all the players who've played for the Rangers this year, a lot of year-end stuff. We'll be looking forward to the draft. We'll be looking forward to, of course, before that, the draft lottery, the lead up to free agency, a whole lot of stuff going on. $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free access, premium access to the New York Rangers. I think I'll try to rattle off all of the. We're at youtube.com/blueshirtbanter, x.com/blueshirtbanter, facebook.com/blueshirtbanter. As Joe has noted, blueshirtbanter.com/blueshirtbanter just brings you back to blueshirtbanter.com. So that's another more indirect way that you can access the same thing.
If you have the internet, you can find Blue Shirt Banter and porn. We're both out there.
Those are two things that exist. And to quote the great musical Avenue Q, the internet is for porn. Yes, this is episode 80. There are 3 Rangers who have worn the number 80. Can you get any of them, Chip? These are all players that do exist, just like Rick Nash did exist.
So I'm pretty sure I know 2 of them. Kevin Weeks was one.
Kevin Weeks was one, 2006 through 2007.
Was Nick Antropov one?
Nick Antropov is the second, 2009. And the other is from this year, dressed, did not play, though. So that kind of tips it off.
So it's got to be a goalie. Did Hugo Olash come up?
Hugo Olash is the other. Very good.
He came up
Very
right
good.
before. He came up right before the roster freeze. Oh, he came up during the Olympics to practice.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So it gets, I guess it gets officially counted for that, even though he has not appeared in a game. That is what appears on Hockey Reference here. So that is what we are going with. So Kevin Weeks, Nick Antropov, and Hugo Olash. So is this this could be the Kevin Weeks episode if I scrouch down and try to just get my head just in the frame here. Now it's the Kevin Weeks episode of the podcast.
There you go. That seems uncomfortable, though.
It is uncomfortable.
Nick Antropov was bald and had a beard, so
we can go with that too. I think just because, look, we've had our frustrations with Kevin Weeks, but I like Kevin Weeks. He wasn't the best goaltender, but he is a great personality and has been arguably, I think, I'd say if we're going to do the video game thing, it's not S tier, but he's probably in the A tier of hockey insiders. So we'll officially make this the Kevin Weeks episode of the podcast.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, that brings us
episode 180 can be the Nick Antropov episode.
Yes. The short-lived Nick Antropov experience episode in episode 180. Boy, I don't want to think about that. What is Rangers World going to be like at episode 180 of this podcast? Basically 2 years from now.
Could be good, could be great, could be really, really, really depressing. Joe could have as much hair as you and I do.
Yeah, that really does span the options, doesn't it? All right.
It's going to be something.
Let's get to the podcast Ombudsman Report for Blueshirt Bandwidth episode 79, where, of course, each week Charlie Vidal will listen to the latest episode of the podcast and correct the record on anything that Joe and I get wrong, or in this case, anything that you and Joe got wrong, since you and Joe were on the podcast last week. We will begin with back-to-back hat tricks. The New York Rangers recorded back-to-back hat tricks in recent games, with Gabe Perreault recording one against the Detroit Red Wings on April 4, and Will Cooley scoring 3 against the Washington Capitals the following night. This was the first time that the Rangers scored hat tricks in consecutive games since, and here's a name for you, Matt Pumple scored 3 power play goals against the Arizona Coyotes in Glendale on December 29th, 2016. And Chris Kreider scored 3, with 2 on the power play, against the Colorado Avalanche in Denver 2 nights later on New Year's Eve. Kevin Fiala injury. Chip has made the point that the Kings probably would not have traded for Panarin If Kevin Fiala injury had occurred before the trade was consummated, Fiala, of course, broke his left leg during the Winter Olympics and is out for the season. Islanders hire DeBoer. The image that Marc-Andre Fleury's agent Alan Walsh tweeted during the 2020 playoff bubble was of Marc-Andre Fleury being stabbed with a sword bearing DeBoer's name. Fleury quickly asked Walsh to delete the tweet because having fun is illegal in the National Hockey League. The Ottinger situation that was referred to was DeBoer pulling Jake Ottinger 7 minutes into an elimination game against the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Final after Ottinger gave up goals on the first 2 shots that he faced. DeBoer then threw him under the bus, saying, quote, "It was partly to spark our team and wake them up, and partly knowing that the status quo had not been working, and that's a pretty big sample size." Patrick Waugh Magic. It was asked whether Patrick Waugh could bring the Magic from Colorado. Prior to being hired by the Islanders, Waugh's only NHL coaching experience was 3 seasons with the Colorado Avalanche from 2013 through 2016. The first season that he was at the helm, the Avalanche surprised many by winning the Central Division with 112 points. Digging into the statistics, the Avalanche's apparent success was in large part a function of, and stop me if you've heard this before, outstanding goaltending and puck luck. Despite being 26th out of then 30 teams in expected goals, the Avalanche finished with the league's 3rd highest point total, thanks to the league's 3rd highest PDO, 2nd highest shooting percentage, and 2nd highest goal differential over expectations. Additionally, Semyon Varlamov was the 2nd best goalie in hockey on a GAR basis, trailing only prime-era Carey Price. The Islanders are old and dumb. Joe mentioned that the New York Islanders are old and made dumb trades at the deadline. The Islanders are the 6th oldest team in the NHL, younger than only, do you want to take a guess at any of these teams that are older on average than the New York Islanders?
Pittsburgh,
Not Pittsburgh.
Florida.
Not Florida.
Really?
Really?
Rangers? The Rangers aren't older than...
Rangers are not in that list. The teams are the Colorado Avalanche, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Los Angeles Kings, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Minnesota Wild.
Wow.
The dumb trades that the Islanders made included trading Jonathan Drouin, a 1st-round pick from Colorado, and a 3rd-round pick from New Jersey in this year's draft for Braden Shen, who is 34 years old, signed for 2 more seasons at $6.5 million a year, and probably not much better than Drouin. Finally, Igor goalie fight. Eric brought up that Igor Shesterkin has a boxing coach during discussion of his fight with Jacob Markstrom. Igor works out with Sergey Novikov, a professional boxer from Belarus who is based in Miami, in order to improve strength, conditioning, and coordination. Eric also mentioned that the angriest he ever saw Hank was when he flipped the net during play against Pittsburgh in March of 2016. Charlie includes a link to that video. And that concludes the Ombudsman.
Great job, Charlie.
All right, Chip. All right. So we are talking the day of the final game of the regular season. The only other game this week was on Monday in Florida against the Panthers, which we found out shortly before the game was going to be Jonathan Quick's final start in the National Hockey League. I'll let you take it, since you did the game notes for that, I'll let you take it from either lane you want to go at this at. Either I know your frustration with the game itself, or just start by talking about Jonathan Quick. You pick, dealer's choice.
Let's start with Jonathan Quick, and let's start with a trivia question for you. Jonathan Quick made his debut for the 2007 LA Kings. There were 3 goalies on that team who played games for the Rangers. Quick is one. Who are the other 2?
2007.
Mm-hmm.
Boy. 3 that played games
3
for
goalies.
Rangers. Is Kevin Weeks one of them?
No,
No, he
Kevin
didn't
Weeks
play
was
for
not one
LA.
of them.
Cloutier?
Cloutier was one. That was
Cloutier
the
was
hard one.
one.
That was the one I didn't think you would get.
I have Cloutier on the brain just because of everybody kept resharing the Dan Cloutier challenging the Islanders bench video, which is A, a classic, and B,
Yes.
anytime just anytime I can see that is great. I cannot think of the Alex Ald.
Nope.
No, it'd be
Jason
too late.
LaBarbera.
Oh boy. And
Jason.
and the other is
And the other is Cloutier and
Cloutier
Quick.
and Quick.
Yep.
Wow. Wow.
Look, I tweeted this out after the announcement was made. I will never forgive Jonathan Quick for what he did to the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Finals, but I am glad I got to see Jonathan Quick play for the Rangers. You can argue that two of the greatest U.S.-born goalies of at least my lifetime both played for the Rangers, and that's Quick and Richter. If you want to go of all time, okay. They're definitely on the Mount Rushmore in some order. Quick, obviously, his Hall of Fame career isn't going to be based on what he did for the Rangers. Obviously, he's going to be a Hall of Famer for what he did for the Kings. But I think having him here, obviously the stories of Matt Rempe living with him and, babysitting his kids, those were all great.
Catching frogs with his kids, yeah.
Exactly. It's just he was a good guy to have here, and I'm glad he made the choice to retire because I think we talked about it a little bit on the banter Slack, which was it was kind of time for the Rangers to make a move anyway. And it's better that Quick is the one making the decision than the Rangers making the decision for Quick. And then you have to go through another summer of bullshit where, oh, here go the Rangers again, pushing out a respected veteran. Drury doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have a pulse on the room. I think
I don't buy that.
Yeah. But we would have heard it. Same way we heard it with Goodrow, same way we heard it with Trouba and Kreider, and we'd have heard it again with Quick. And so he saved us from having to deal with that. As for the game itself, fuck this team. I'm sorry. Yes, I get it. At one point, I was thinking what's going to happen is the Rangers are going to get a loser point and then lose the game in overtime to screw up both their draft odds and not get Quick the win. So from that standpoint, at least they shit the bed in the in regulation and came away with no points. But this team they've come up so small in such moment spots, right? Every time the Rangers brought someone out to celebrate the centennial season, they laid an egg. Ika's 1000th game, no one showed up. This game, they got beaten by, I swear to God, an AHL roster. There are, I think I put in the notes, there was something like 13 of those players do not have contracts for next year. They are literally playing to stay not in the NHL because most of them aren't NHLers. They are playing to stay in affiliated North American hockey. And they beat the Rangers. So whatever,
I hear you. And there's a point to be made there. And I'm sure, we've talked about this in terms of tanking. To emphasize again, I want to emphasize this point that we made last week or 2 weeks ago about tanking, that this is not the same level of problem that exists, or it's just not the same thing. There really isn't tanking in the NHL. The closest that you can get is what you saw from the Florida Panthers in that game, right? Where they have, and part of that, truthfully, given what we know about hockey culture, has a hell of a lot more to do with the fact that the Florida Panthers this year have just been devastated by injuries. Absolutely devastated by injuries, starting with Barkov before the season and Matthew Tkachuk as well, and continuing really all the way through. So good for them for taking it as an excuse to just go ahead and sit all of those players who are banged up. And kind of to your point of the whole quote unquote tanking, it didn't work. They still beat the Rangers in regulation and got themselves points that they would also argue, and their fan base would probably also argue that they don't need if they're looking for, best possible draft positioning. Though their pick goes to Blackhawks, and it is protected though, isn't it?
It is protected, and I think that there's like a cascade effect, right? Because it's protected, the Blackhawks might get their pick unprotected next year. And because the Blackhawks get their pick unprotected next year, the Bruins get their unprotected pick in 2029.
Jeez.
It's a and to you know to the point about tanking, tanking can't be a thing because if you're Vinny Hizinostra or one of these other players who doesn't have a contract for next year, you don't care
Yeah,
about
you're
the
playing for
draft
that.
status. You're
Yeah.
playing. You're playing
Yeah.
hard. You want someone to sign you.
Yeah, if you saw the absolutely incredible viral clip from the Pacers Nets game from this past week of they come back. So the Pacers are up by like 40 points because again, tanking is a thing in the NBA. And it cuts to this like couple who are Pacers fans. The guy is just like, unloading some stream of consciousness and she interrupts. It was like, that's you. That's you. What the fuck are you talking about? The fact that like that whole thing is happening again emphasizes the point that like tanking very much is a thing in the NBA in a way that it is
Yes.
just not in the National Hockey League. So I understand like what you wrote about the don't come back and tell me that it's good for the tank. I'm not going to tell you it's good for the tank because that's not a thing that actually exists. It is good for the Rangers. And Jonathan Quick has won 410 games in his National Hockey League career. Of course, he and the entire team would have liked to have won that game. Of course, they would have. It's better that they lost that game. It is better that they lost that game in the way that they lost that game. So if there was something more to play for than the kind of dignity of getting Jonathan Quick a win in his last start, I would agree more emphatically with you. I guess I kind of like lightly agree that it's like, yes, it would have been nicer if they could have won that game for him. It is a much better situation. And the Rangers have a legit shot at the third best odds for the first overall pick, in part as a result of that.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't mind that the Rangers lost. I mind that for the first 25, 30 minutes, they didn't show up. It was a callback to it just reminded me of the arrogance of the organization where they saw a team, my opinion, they saw a team that was skating, a top line that had 3 more goals than Mika Zibanejad. Um, and they thought we'll cakewalk this. And they couldn't. And it reminds me of the arrogance of the organization being so, devastated that Chris Drury would have the gall to break up this team that had won nothing, right? So it wasn't that they lost, it was how they lost. That was more annoying to me.
I think that's fair. Although I don't know that, playing their hearts out and giving up a goal with like a minute and a half to go makes me feel all that different. I just don't know at this point in the season. I'm dead inside, Chip, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know that that is going to have any meaningful effect on me. So I understand what you're saying. I was just far less annoyed about any of that because the result was the result that I wanted. And look, Jonathan Quick, numbers for this year don't look great. He was 6-17-2. He had 2 shutouts, but a 309 goals against average and an 891 save percentage, which just again goes to testify to what you were saying that like this was just time. He's 40 years old. It's kind of remarkable that he had been playing as well as he had at 40 years old. This also explains as we kind of go back to conversations we've had in the past, the Edmonton Oilers willingly traded for Tristan Jarry. I made a joke at the time that it's like, they might win themselves a Stanley Cup if they just traded for Jonathan Quick instead. the fact that he had in his mind that he was going to retire at the end of this year, which I'm sure he'd been thinking about through the course of the entire season. He's like, yeah, no, I don't want to go live in an apartment in Edmonton just for, a couple of months, just for a shot at another Stanley Cup. Now, this would be a very different story if it were a Ray Bourque-like thing,
Right.
where he had played this amazing consensus Hall of Fame career and had not won a championship. Then it might be different. But I think he's got his rings. He was playing for the team that he grew up rooting for. And, I think there's something to be said. And while I have no real problem with the goodbye tour for major players in sports. With the Yankees, we got it with Jeter, we got it with Mariano Rivera. Uh, we we've seen it in the National Hockey League. We're inevitably going to get it when somebody like Sidney Crosby finally announces that they're retiring. Though I do think that it is kind of interesting that Quick did not want that. Apparently, he could have had it if he had announced at the beginning of the year. He would have been honored, at every last time he played at every arena that he was going to visit this season. He apparently just didn't want that. So I did see some people grousing a little about like, why couldn't he have announced this earlier? So the Rangers could have, celebrated him at the final home game of the year. I think the easiest explanation to that is that's just not something that Jonathan Quick wanted. Like, I don't think he really wanted that kind of attention in that way. He's won his titles and he got to play for the team he grew up rooting for, which is having an ignominious end to a crappy season. And I just don't think he wanted to make it all about him. And in that sense, good for him. I would have said pretty much the same thing, though, if good for him, if he had chosen the other route. I just think you don't have to pick a side on this one. It's perfectly fine for Jonathan Quick to handle it whatever way Jonathan Quick wants it handled.
Yep. And for the fans who say, "Great, Dylan Garand is definitely going to be our backup," based on the 2 starts that he made. Matthew Murray is a free agent this year. He's coming off an injury-plagued season with Seattle. He's been an up and down goalie for the last couple of years, but he did win Stanley Cups for uh, Mike Sullivan. So if I had to pick a free agent who I think is going to be signed by the Rangers, not saying he's going to be signed to an NHL deal, but I would be really surprised if Matt Murray is not in camp with the Rangers competing for that backup goaltending spot. You Teams like having veterans back there because it does take a different type of preparation, different type of mindset to prepare as your backup goalie than as your starting goalie. And I could very easily see the Rangers bringing in a veteran, and Matt Murray checks a lot of boxes.
I'm glad you brought this up because I completely disagree. Not that they're
Okay.
going to do it. I don't think it makes any sense or there is any reason to do it unless he is willing to sign a two-way contract with the understanding of he's going to Hartford to be what Louis Domingue used to be for Hartford. And if Garan gets hurt, he is the first guy up to be the backup. I
Okay.
don't see the if the I don't see the point to that from either direction because the Rangers, as we have noted, well, I do appreciate the sunny optimism that some have been bringing to the analysis of what this team might be like next year. This is a team that is probably going to surprise me if they make the playoffs next year. Like that is the ceiling for me is maybe they make the playoffs. I think if you really want to if you believe in the retool idea and you want to have that conversation, I think the following season is the earliest that you can start talking about making the playoffs. You can also look back through history to your point about, teams like having a veteran back there. Okay, yes, there are examples of that. Go back through Henrik Lundqvist's backups. You had Cam Talbot. You had Alexander Georgiev, neither of whom were veterans, neither of whom had any NHL experience before being a backup goaltender with the Rangers. They traded for Antti Ranta, who I don't think you quite classify as a veteran in the sense that you're talking about Murray. Pavlich was probably the last like legit before Quick backup goaltender in that sense. He had played plenty of seasons and it was at the end of his career. So it has happened before on teams that were expected to be competitive. And the Rangers really are not next year. So I see no real reason not to have Dylan Garand as your backup goaltender next year. He has played, 3 seasons now? 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons.
4 seasons.
In the AHL. He has been pretty good through the first couple, and he was really good last year. And, Hartford, of course, is a bit of a tire fire. So, take his numbers this year. But he also played 2 games for the Rangers and has looked good in those games in an environment that will probably not be terribly dissimilar from the environment that he'll be playing in next year. So I just what Connor Sherry is to a lot of people, Matt Murray would be to me, because there just is no good reason to do that. If not only because, despite having won those 2 Stanley Cups, I don't know that Dylan Garand is a worse goaltender in any meaningful way than Matt Murray is at this point of his career. So I just don't get it. I don't think it makes any sense.
Totally fair. Like I said, I think he's played 5 games this year. So, it is entirely possible that he would have to accept a deal like the one you're saying where he would be sent to Hartford and be the presumptive number 1 goaltender at Hartford. Because frankly, Hartford doesn't have anybody behind Garand. What do you got?
Callum Tongue. I think he played a pretty good game the other night, and
Hugo Olash and I'm forgetting his name. Guy who's up earlier this year and we couldn't figure out why.
Spencer Martin.
So, it's not like they can't use a veteran goalie down there. Like I said, I would not be surprised. I would be more surprised if the job is just handed to Garand than I would be if they brought in Murray or some veteran to at least challenge and keep him honest during camp and off season.
Yeah, again, this is not a statement that they're not going to do that. Again, I just don't see what is the need for the challenge. What is needed to be kept honest? Like, this is just like, to me, that's kind of like bullshit sports talk kind of stuff. I don't see anything about Dylan Garand that it suggests that he is acting with the kind of entitlement, the sense of entitlement that we saw from people like Brennan Othman, or that we saw from people like Vitaly Kravtsov, who thought that they should just be handed a spot. He has waited patiently for an opportunity to be called up to play in the National Hockey League that he finally got this year when injuries allowed for it. So I just don't see the need for that.
Well, now I kind of want it to happen just to see how annoyed you get.
To make one more point here too, for the people who like to argue about whether goaltenders are truly great goaltenders or not based on whether they have Stanley Cup rings. Of course, Matt Murray has 2 of them. The last time that Matt Murray played more than 30 games in an NHL season was in 2019-2020. So unless, if you are one of those truly brain dead kind of people who would be like, well, Henrik Lundqvist doesn't have any rings and Matt Murray has 2. Okay, yeah, like Antti Niemi got a ring with the Chicago Blackhawks. That doesn't mean that Antti Niemi, this is a team sport, and I would argue the most team sport of all of the team sports. And while a goaltender absolutely can be a difference maker for you, you absolutely can. And people do have merit in making this argument. I just land on the other side of it from I would rather have somebody I absolutely know is completely not just reliable, but great in net, like we have had with Hank and Igor. But yeah, you can win a championship with a mediocre goaltender if the rest of the team is built like, say, those mid-2010s Chicago Blackhawks. If you've got yourself a Jonathan Tays and a Patrick Kane and a Hossa and a Seabrook and a Duncan Keith, plus the supporting cast. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up Murray, if not only for the excuse to make that point. Okay, let's keep it on notes of disagreement here, because I think you and I disagree on something else that happened this week, or I guess over the weekend. Drew Fortescue, who was signed to his entry-level contract. They're burning a year of it to get him into the National Hockey League to play games this year. Was healthy scratched before, which game was it? It was the game against Buffalo. Was it Buffalo?
Was it Buffalo or Dallas?
It was Dallas. It was the game against Dallas. So Fortescue is listed as a healthy scratch. The result of that is he misses out on an $80,000 a year bonus, which he would have gotten if he played 10 games. If he plays tonight in Tampa, again, we are recording on Wednesday. If he plays tonight in Tampa, he will have finished the season with 9 games. So that healthy scratch cost him that $80,000 a year bonus. But there was more to it, which was Fortescue playing fewer than 10 games this season ensures that he falls into the 10.2C restricted free agent category. This means he won't be eligible for an offer sheet or for salary arbitration at the end of his ELC. Players who age 18 to 21 at the time that they sign their entry-level contract earn a year of pro experience by playing 10 or more professional games in any league while under NHL contract per the CBA. I believe you fell more on this was smart business for the Rangers side of this divide. Defend yourself.
To be clear, I don't necessarily give a shit either way, but
we're here for nothing, if nothing else, making mountains out of molehills.
Correct. And this is absolutely that. Look, if Drew Fortescue is good enough over the next couple of years to where you look back and say, wow, thank God the Rangers kept his salary down a year and got that extra year of controlled talent, phenomenal. If he's not, then the fact that he was scratched a game this year is irrelevant anyway. Would I like to see them just make good and give him a check for $80,000 because he's, a college kid still making a good salary, but $80,000 ain't nothing? Yes, I would. Do I really, think that Drew Fortescue is over there seething that the Rangers healthy scratched him and this is going to ruin his relationship with the Rangers? No. Do I think that I needed to see Urho Vakanainen again? No. Do I necessarily? Look, I have a bigger to channel Joe here. I have a bigger issue with the fact that Scott Morrow is playing in Hartford and Vinny Iorio is not playing at all than I do that Drew Fortescue was scratched a game. I would actually say I would have liked to have seen him play earlier when he was first signed, and then have them make a decision about what they wanted to do or take the decision out of their hands. This was an easy decision. The season's going nowhere. They might as well, keep the controllability, make good with him on the 80,000 some other way, scratch him, get Urho one last game, and get him out of here too.
I am not concerned that Drew Fortescue is seething about this. I don't understand the logic of this, however. I can buy him practicing a few times with the Rangers before getting into a game, which set up this situation where he needed to play out the entirety of the rest of the regular season in order to hit 10 games and get that bonus and not fall into that RFA category. I can buy that as completely reasonable. I think, especially for a guy coming from the NCAA, wanting him to get a few practices before getting into the lineup is a completely reasonable thing that a head coach would want to do. And again, I don't think that he's seething about missing out on this bonus. And, if they can hand him a check for 80 grand, or if that just gets factored into what his next, amortize 80 grand over his next contract, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. Look, I think Drew Fortescue's been fine. I don't think I've seen anything from him that really screams to me that like we were wrong and this is a guy with first pairing upside. I think this is a perfectly good ceiling of a second pairing defenseman, probably a third pairing defenseman in the National Hockey League. He's seemed fine to me. First of all, the two parts of that RFA designation is that it protects the Rangers from having to deal with either offer sheets or arbitration. First of all, arbitration. Almost no cases actually end up in arbitration. Being scheduled for an arbitration hearing is a mechanism to put a deadline basically on negotiations, because neither side really wants to go through that experience. The player certainly doesn't want to, because I mean, again, it is one of those things where you go before a mediator and you have to say as the player why, you're better than you actually are and deserve that money. And the team has to say, actually, no, he's dog shit and you shouldn't pay him anything. Nobody wants to go through that experience, which is why most teams settle before it. I think the risk of arbitration with Drew Fortescue was probably pretty low to start with. So I don't know that you're gaining all that much by landing him now in this category by healthy scratching him and avoiding the possibility of arbitration. Other than, of course, yes, you have more leverage over him. I just don't think that there was going to be a massive problem in coming to an agreement on a contract in the near future for this guy anyway. And secondarily, to protect him from offer sheets, something else that doesn't happen. And if it's going to happen, I just don't see it happening for a guy like Drew Fortescue. Like, he's just not a valuable enough and a talented enough player that he's the kind of guy that you're going to seek out on an offer sheet. There are going to be comparatively young, similar profile defensemen who are going to be available on the free agent market for any team at the time that they're looking for him that they would consider offer sheeting Drew Fortescue. So I just don't see what the Rangers have truly gained here. And I think the best possible interpretation of this is some combination or one or the other of tone deafness and ignorance. And the worst possible version is they think it's necessary in order to do this, to give themselves a little bit of negotiating leverage over a guy I don't think they'd have any problem reaching a contract with, and to protect him from an offer sheet that was never coming. And for a team that has had so many bad looks in the last couple of years, I just don't see why this was necessary at all.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it was necessary. I would say the worst look would be if it's the Rangers saying, we need to pinch our pennies here and we can't give this kid $80,000. I think that's worse than them just being tone deaf or whatever. But
They got plenty of money.
yeah, they've got plenty of money.
money.
I'm not, like I said, I'm not worried about I'm not worried about the motives behind it, because for me it's a minor blip. And like we agreed, Fortescue's not over there seething about it. I don't think it's going to come down to some point in, in a future contract where he goes, "Hey, you remember when you sat me and cost me $80,000? Now I'm going to go sign with, the Devils or whatever." It was stupid. It was unnecessary. But at the end of the day, it's a blip. You're right. If the Rangers didn't have so many of these just head scratchingly dumbass decisions, we wouldn't be talking about it. But it's another one, which
Right.
probably leads into the agent poll from The Athletic.
Yes, a perfect segue into that. That was exactly where I was going to go. I'd made the point earlier in the year that it's where I've gotten to with Chris Drury is that like the forest is less impressive than the individual trees. Like the trees all look fine when you look at it as an individual tree, and you zoom out and you look at the forest, and it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's not as nice as any one of those individual trees seems in a vacuum. And so I agree with you in that sense. It's a blip. It's not the most important thing, but it is yet another piece of evidence in the direction of what we saw from this agent poll. So our friend Snark Messier had posted this. It's a new article from The Athletic. Some of the top player agents in the NHL were polled on 9 questions which pertained to the league and its future. One question they were posed was, which franchise is the worst run in the National Hockey League? The Rangers were second behind the Vancouver Canucks. 7 votes out of 23 for the Vancouver Canucks, 4 for the Rangers, 2 for the Nashville Predators, 2 for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and then 1 for the Senators, Flames, Maple Leafs, Predators, Devils, Blackhawks, Hurricanes. That's fascinating. And declined to answer 1 other. So do we take this seriously?
No.
Why not?
There was a comment that was associated with it, and I don't remember the comment, but it was something like, they forget that players are human or something like that. So it's essentially agents by design have an adversarial partnership with general managers. And if you look at what Chris Drury has done in the last several years, it is to use clauses that those agents negotiated on behalf of their clients as loopholes to get players out who did not necessarily want to leave. So I can understand an agent. I'm sure Barclay Goodrow's agent is one who voted for the Rangers being the worst run franchise. I am sure that Jacob Trouba's agent is one who voted for the Rangers being the worst run franchise, because those are cases where Chris Drury said, "Yeah, you know what, Barclay, you have a no trade clause. You don't have I can't waive your ass clause to get you out of here." So I am sure Artemi Panarin's agent probably voted that way about the Rangers as well, because Panarin didn't get the long-term big money contract offer that he wanted from the Rangers. And so that's why he's not here anymore. So there's a lot of it that's very butthurt, would I guess be the technical phrase. And I just don't, it's not like players aren't signing here. It's not like Alexei Lafreniere's agents told him don't sign with the Rangers, or Igor's agents told him don't sign with the Rangers. Or Gavrikov's agents certainly didn't tell him don't take less money to come sign with the Rangers. So how much does this really matter? To me, it doesn't. It's not a reflection of how players feel about the team. It's not a reflection of how the team is actually run. It is, to me, a reflection of Chris Drury took advantage of a clause that was negotiated likely by you, and your client was pissed, and now you're pissed at Drury because your client was pissed.
I think there's a lot of truth in all of that. I'm going to make a somewhat pedantic rhetorical point, which is you hear this in some news discussions about tax loopholes, right? And like, oh, I'm sorry, is it a loophole, or is it just the form and shape of the tax code? Are they following the tax code as it is written? I looked up just for funsies here. The definition of loophole is an ambiguity or inadequacy in the law or a set of rules. There's no ambiguity in Barclay Goodrow or Jacob Trouba's contracts. And I would argue that there's no inadequacy there, too. If they felt that that contract was inadequate, I imagine that they wouldn't have signed that contract that included those protections that they sought, but not the protections that they didn't get because they didn't seek them, or that the Rangers were just unwilling to give. They willingly signed the contract. And I have made this point numerous times. The primary point of contracts isn't so much what, they are binding you to do, is that they tell you how to get out of them. That's what's important, really, at the end of the day about contracts. I agree with you that I think if you were to poll different groups of people other than just player agents, you would get different results to this. You're almost certainly correct that Barclay Goodrow's agent is one of these votes. You were almost certainly correct that Jacob Trouba's agent is also one of these votes. And that's half. That's half of the 4 that voted. But I mean, even still, try to zoom out and examine this on just a much more even playing field of like who you truly feel, you as the person listening to this or the person reading that Athletic piece, as the worst run franchises. I do think they got the top one right. Right. I think that the Vancouver Canucks, a team that has never won a championship, that it managed just with the Rangers in a sense that, like, as Jeff Merrick was talking about earlier this season, the biggest trade that they have made in the last 2 seasons was a trade that has not worked out particularly well for either team, which was the JT Miller trade. They have not managed to get an improvement out of Elias Pettersson. Quinn Hughes is no longer on the team. They are probably going to say goodbye to more of their good players over this offseason because they're fully in rebuilding mode now. So I think they probably got that one right. But, do you, and I'm going to come back to one of these teams in a moment, do you really think that the Rangers are a worse run franchise than the Ottawa Senators? Do you really think the Rangers are a worse run franchise than the Calgary Flames, than the Nashville Predators, than like a team that's not even on this list here, than the New York Islanders? Do you really think that they are worse? And the Blackhawks too at this point in time. Like this is just another Chicago-based franchise that is unwilling to spend the money that is necessary for them to be successful. Do you think the Rangers are a worse run franchise than the Chicago Blackhawks are at this point? They've had Connor Bedard for what, 3-4 seasons now? And you really have not seen meaningful improvement from the Chicago Blackhawks.
How about the Columbus Blue Jackets?
That's where I was going next.
Today, you have Rick Bowness coming out and bashing the entire team, the head coach of the team, ripping the team because there is a culture there that is okay with losing. That comes on the heels of my buddy, John Tortorella, basically driving any player who wanted to be there away, including Panarin, Bobrovsky, Duchesne, Dubois, and, that team's a mess. You've got you mentioned Ottawa, who can't go 2 consecutive seasons without a sex scandal coming out of their locker room. The Devils, who everybody and their mother knew Quinn Hughes wanted to be traded to New Jersey, and Tom Fitzgerald could not figure out a way to make that happen. Toronto, who thought somehow that getting rid of Mitch Marner in favor of getting tougher guys at the bottom of the lineup and getting slow defensemen was going to make them a better team.
Can I just add to that? The 2 last teams
sure.
that you mentioned, we talked about the Brad Treliving thing a couple weeks ago. Tom Fitzgerald, another example here of if you thought there was at least a 10% chance that you were going to end up in this place, that you were going to get rid of Tom Fitzgerald, why in the name of Zeus's butthole did you let him manage the trade deadline? Did you let him be the one negotiating the possibility of a Quinn Hughes trade? You're honestly going to tell me that you think either of those two at this point are better run franchises? Now, look, this is not to say that the Rangers in this sense are anything more than like the best gas station sushi in Alabama. They are not necessarily a well-run franchise, and we have done chapter and verse on that over now 80 episodes of this podcast to varying degrees, including mostly in the last, over the course of the last season. I'm not arguing that they are a model franchise. I am not arguing that they are one of the best run franchises in the National Hockey League. I'm just arguing that I think your point is correct, that a lot of this is just agent butthurt. But Also, there are just so much obviously worse run franchises that exist out there. I want to give you that whole bonus quote because this is just amazing. Quote, all you got to do is look at the stat sheet. 3 hits, 23 giveaways. I don't know if I'm back, but if I'm back, I'm changing this culture. These guys, they don't care. Losing is not important enough to them. It doesn't bother them. Woof.
That is an indictment. That is not the sort of thing you hear from coaches very often. Damn.
Bowness and Bowness has no reason to give a shit, right? Like at the point in his career, especially with what we have seen in the National Hockey League, I have no doubt that he could probably get another job tomorrow if he wanted another job. There are going to be coaching vacancies that he would be up for. He doesn't have to stay, and frankly, that's just the best possible position for him to be in. You know, I always viewed this as when I was in leadership at a previous job that my role was to give my opinion, and they don't have to take it. They don't have to do anything with it. They don't have to like it, but I'm there to give my opinion. And I appreciate that that's what Bowness is doing here. He is saying it as it exactly is. And you know what? The results in Columbus bear it out.
By the way, did you see, speaking of poorly run franchises, did you see who 2 of the leading candidates are for replacing Barry Trotz?
Yes, Tom Fitzgerald and Brad Treliving.
Yes. So
as we
thoughts and prayers
reduce,
to the people of
reuse, and
Smashville.
recycle around the National Hockey League once again. Yeah, good luck with that, Nashville.
And look, to your point, this is not a situation where we're carrying water for Drury or the Rangers. I just think there are a lot of very shitty run franchises, and the Rangers are amongst them. I think it makes them an average NHL franchise. I think the average NHL franchise is probably poorly run, and the Rangers are average. There are the number of well-run NHL franchises is a lot smaller than the number of poorly run NHL franchises.
I'm going to adapt a concept here from the political scientist Mike Munger, his concept of unicorn government, and we'll turn this into unicorn management, which this is a lot of the argument that I see about Chris Drury, which is not to say that the identifications of Chris Drury's failures are wrong or incorrect. What I have always bristled against is people who point out those things and then suggest it be only compared to an alternative scenario of unicorn management, where you have, it's like, so now that we've identified this failure, we will get whoever in there and they will make all the right decisions. And by right decisions, I mean all the decisions that I would make if I were in that position. And that is not what you can compare it against. You can engage in some level of a better choice would have been X, a better choice would have been Y. But at some point, you do need to engage in the reality of what the actual alternatives are. And the actual alternatives, in most cases for the Rangers, would probably be Brendan Shanahan. But as you look around the rest of the National Hockey League, you do see what some of the other alternatives would be. It would be guys like Brad Treliving. It would be guys like Barry Trotz before Barry Trotz got out of there, like Tom Fitzgerald in New Jersey. You know, to your point that you have made previously, Bill Zito in Florida signed players to contracts like he did not give a fuck. Because he didn't have to.
He doesn't.
Because all those GMs operate as if almost all of these problems are going to be problems for future somebody, or even maybe future them. But in the best case scenario, it's future them. In the worst case scenario, it's future somebody else, in which case, who gives a shit? And it is somewhat amazing that we had the Florida Panthers 3 consecutive appearances in the Stanley Cup final. 2 Stanley Cup championships, and again, aided by injuries, but just an absolute fall off a cliff this year after a lot of us, especially when they re-signed Marchand, were talking about like, it's amazing that they have managed to keep the whole band together like this. And, you know, it just turns out that the band is like, you know, the touring version of AC/DC in 2026, where they come out and it's like, I'm sorry, like, is this green Jello night at the home? It's bad. it's bad. But you have to compare it to what the honest, logical, realistic alternatives are, and not unicorn management.
Also, fans tend to want a GM who's going to operate like a fan would operate, forgetting the fact that job security is not guaranteed, right? So don't
You
give
don't get
out no
fired
movement.
in Chell mode on NHL
Yeah,
26.
don't give out no movement clauses. Well, fuck you. If it takes a no movement clause on a 7-year max term contract to get a player in here who's going to make the team better, I will sign that contract, because if it works out, I don't care how the contract ages. If it doesn't work out, someone else's problem. Because I'm fired anyway. Tank for 2 years and get as many draft picks in here. No. Why? Because those are going to be draft picks that some other GM is going to make his money on the back of. If my team sucks for 2 years or for 3 years, I'm not going to be here when the team is good, right? GMs and coaches operate in a world where they get fired. Fans do not. We're going to be here rooting for the Rangers, God willing, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Chris Drury isn't going to be the GM of the Rangers for another decade, I don't think, unless things turn around. So he's making moves. Every GM is making the moves that they think will keep them employed for their next contract. Or to quote Philip Seymour Hoffman in Moneyball, they are making moves that they can justify in an interview with a future employer.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's all correct. Do you want to talk about the JT Miller article, or do you want to just go straight into question?
We can talk a little bit about the JT Miller article.
So Vince Mercogliano of The Athletic has an article that is based on an interview that he did with JT Miller after the team lost to the Florida Panthers in the penultimate game of the regular season. I think people who listen to this podcast know that I have arrived at a point where I am not an enormous fan of JT Miller. I am now where Joe was earlier in the season, where I would push the button to undo the trade if I possibly could, which says more about like me just not wanting JT Miller on my team than it does about wanting the assets back that the Rangers sent to the Vancouver Canucks in that trade. I will, as I've noted a couple of times, I noted in game notes as well, and this is noted in the article, Miller has been better. And even Vince points out, and this is something I actually appreciate, Vince including some things like, expected goals and some of the metrics from the beginning of the season, where, as we noted back then, Joe and I, in talking about this, the Rangers weren't playing bad hockey. They just couldn't score. And there was more of that was an inability to finish than it was getting goalied. Though they did get goalied a handful of times in the beginning of the season. The expectation for Miller's line is that he should have scored more. And he has been at about a point per game pace since January. So credit to JT Miller there. Apparently he's happier back playing center. He has been playing third line, essentially center for the Rangers, which if this all helps contribute to him being a more positive contributor to this team, fine with me, all in favor of it. We'll see what the lineup looks like next year. He has somebody had mentioned in the comments on Spotify that we have not talked a lot about Ty Cartier. That line with who is it? Is him, Miller, Cartier? Who am I missing? Sherry has not been bad. In fact, it's been a pretty decent line for the Rangers. I like Ty Cartier a lot. For all the people who constantly want to skewer Drury's work, and again, I'm not going to revisit the whole conversation there, other than to say that we have plenty of legitimate criticisms of Chris Drury's work. Cartier was a great ad. It cost them nothing to pick him up. He absolutely looks like a guy who you can plug in on a third or fourth line for this team. He's young. He plays tough. He's scored a couple of goals, so it looks like he can add a little bit of that secondary offense. So, I am 2 thumbs up on the Ty Cartier acquisition. With Miller here in this article, I found it weird in that, I am happy to find any excuse to skewer JT Miller at this point. And I weirdly came away from this article more sympathetic to him than I entered it. And I think the biggest problem that Miller has is, you look at some stars in professional sporting leagues, and you look at team leaders who have this kind of almost perfect ability to say, even if it is often just like saying nothing in a lot of words, the right thing in the right moment when they are talking to the media. And JT Miller just does not seem to possess that. He gets overcome and overwhelmed by his emotions in a way that I think is detrimental to him. This all leads to why I don't like the choice of him as the captain of the team, but obviously not my decision to make. But I came away from it more sympathetic to him, but more aggravated by what they note in there, which is that he has dealt with injuries all season long. And look, I get hockey culture. I get from a theoretical standpoint that the Rangers, only until 2 weeks ago, were still theoretically, even though they've now clinched the last place in the Eastern Conference, theoretically still possible to make the playoffs. They weren't. There was no need to play him as much as he played this season. There's a quote in there about him, like, pushing through that injury that he suffered in the preseason to be there on opening night. I get on one hand why he wants to be there on opening night of the first year that he's been named the captain of the team that originally drafted him and then traded him away. I get that. It wasn't necessary, and it didn't help. They got shut out. They played terribly. It was clear that he was hurt, and he wasn't able to play well. And he wasn't able to play very well for a huge swath of the beginning of the season. And he should have taken the time off to get right. Be perfectly welcomed back and celebrated as the first time that you're on the ice with the C 10 games into the season, let alone on opening night. None of it was necessary, and it just drives me crazy. But I weirdly came away from that piece a little bit more sympathetic to Miller than I did when I started reading.
So, two things. First, on Cartier, I think he has been everything the Rangers hoped Brendan Othman would be. I
Yes.
think that he is, for the, back before Sherwood was traded to San Jose, there was a lot of talk Rangers would be in on Kiefer Sherwood. Ty Cartier is, I think, Kiefer Sherwood 6 years younger, and several $1 million less expensive. He adds that same dynamic to the bottom six. And I think I like having him around. I've heard the comparison of him to Ryan Callahan a lot, and I think I would go more Sean Avery than Ryan Callahan, in that he's probably not going to score as much as Callahan did. He's gonna score. Sean Avery could put the puck in the net from time to time too. He's more of an agitator, and I just love the the spirit he brings to the team. I feel like the team, we talked about how the team has had more jumps since the kids have come in. I think Cartier, coincidence or not, the team has had more jumps since Ty Cartier joined the lineup. As for the Miller article, I will admit, when I read the headline and saw that it was talking about dealing with booing, I rolled my eyes, because I don't need another player talking about how it feels to be booed by home fans. But that wasn't what this was. This was a player in a time and a culture where mental health is a real thing and treated as a real thing. This is a player who does not give off the warm and fuzzies, showing some vulnerability. And I think that's an important thing. Not just for him, not just for the fans, but in general. I think it's an important thing as a society that people are able to do. And so I do applaud him for that. I agree with you. He is not the right choice to be captain for all the reasons that you said. I'll go a step further. Before he became a complete and total toxic bitch, Jacob Trouba was a better captain than JT Miller, because
Until
Jacob
he wasn't,
Trouba, yeah, because Jacob Trouba had the ability to stand in front of the reporters, give the right answers, talk, extemporaneously about everything that was going on with the game. Brian Leetch wasn't a very good captain either, from a from an ability to talk to the media either. I am not comparing JT Miller to Brian Leach. I'm just saying sometimes good players do not make good captains because the captain has to be someone who can stand in front of the microphones and speak about everything that's going on.
It's a different skill set.
It is. It's a PR skill set, and JT Miller is certainly never going to be confused with being the most gregarious guy in the room. And it's probably a role he's miscast in. And if you're asking for JT Miller to be that kind of good quote, you know, very even keeled when things are going well or when things are going poorly, you might as well be asking for, for me to be Emma Stone's stunt double. It's not going to happen. Right.
Yeah. I had hosted a podcast at one of my previous jobs, and there was only one episode of the podcast that we recorded that we never aired. And it was an interview podcast. I was the host and interviewer. And the way that I approach doing interviews is I know the first question that I'm going to ask. And I have a couple of questions written down that if the conversation dead ends, that I can flip to restart the conversation. But other than that, I think the role of an interviewer is to ask the first question, listen to what the person says, and engage with that. And only when it dead ends do I go to one of my preformed questions to restart the conversation. The only episode that we had ever aired was somebody who I'd ask a question and I would get an answer sometimes of it's like, oh, I don't think that I can answer that question. Like it's out of my field of expertise, or it's not quite the right question for this reason or that reason. And what was amazing to me is that this person never got the most basic kind of PR training. If you're going to be in a position where you're going to have a microphone in front of your face, which is, my friend who does this kind of media training calls it the block and bridge, which is summarized as, that's a very interesting question. But what I think the more interesting question is, and then you talk about whatever you want. And for people who say it's like, well, aren't they just going to follow up and re-ask the question? Everybody is on a limited set of time. And if you ask the question a couple of times and you get the same evasion a couple of times, you're just going to move on to another question there. So in a world where you have sports psychology, where I agree with you, I think it has been a good development by and large, that understanding that these are young people making a ton of money with a lot of pressure on them, playing a professional sport, doing something that less than 1% of the population gets to do, does have an impact on you. And the way that players are dealing with it now, I would argue, is a hell of a lot more healthy than the combination of drugs and alcohol. That was the way that a lot of players dealt with these kinds of problems in the past. Get JT Miller some media training so that he knows that if he doesn't like the question, he can block and bridge it into something else and eventually move on from it. I think he would be helped tremendously by all of that. And I agree with you. Like I typically am not here for players complaining about what it feels like to get booed, because the simple answer to that question is play better, be better. If you're not going to, you could see a 60-loss team not get booed by its fans if it plays hard and tries and competes every single game. But the reality of the situation is they are just a badly constructed team that doesn't have enough talent. The complaint, to bring it back to where we started, is that the Rangers have a lot of talent. Not enough, but they have a decent amount of talent on this team, but frequently do not show up and do not play like it. That's the reason that they have been getting booed. And I agree with you. I think Miller actually handled that pretty decently in that interview. You can be vulnerable in one-on-one longer interviews like this, but in the locker room after games, you have to have the right answers. And I think that is probably one of his biggest failings. The good news there is that it's fixable. I totally think that it is fixable, or it is at least able to be addressed by bringing in somebody who can help him with those answers. But I just want to note for everybody who thinks that I am unnecessarily dedicated to some narrative about JT Miller, he has been better through the second half of the season. And I'm more sympathetic after this interview. I still don't think he's the right person to be the captain of the Rangers. I would still undo the trade if I possibly could, more having to do with how long the Rangers are tied to him and at what cost. But it is what it is. We are where we are, and there we go. Let's
Fair
get to some
enough.
questions.
All right.
You too can ask questions if you are a member of Blueshirt Banter, $85 a year, or even the $40 commenting tier. Also gets you the ability, community tier gets you the ability to ask questions. Questions like this one from Nicole Vitale. If for some reason the Rangers don't trade Trocheck this offseason, which I still feel is not off the table depending on draft lottery order, if they were to somehow get one or two, they would likely get a Stenberg or McKenna to slot immediately into the top six. How would we get Gabe on power play one?
I adore this question, Nicole. I adore this question because I asked Eric a similar question in our text. If the Rangers land one of the first two picks, not what would you do, but do you still think they trade Trocheck, or do they keep Trocheck and add someone like Alex Tuck and roll out a top six of Gabe, Mika, Laugh, McKenna, Trocheck, Tuck, with a third line of Sherry, Miller, Greentree, and then fourth line of Sikora, Laba, Hamelish?
I understand the argument for that. I think the writing is on the wall about the Trocheck trade, and I think we do need to keep in mind that there are, again, even with that lineup, I have a hard time buying the Rangers as a legit competitor with that lineup. I don't think it's enough. And I think the value you're going to get back in trading Vincent Trocheck, who is effectively a combination of the most sought after free agent and trade target simultaneously, because there really is nobody on free agency. I still believe that there's just too much to be gained by trading Trocheck, and I think the Rubicon has been crossed with him. I think the lead up to the trade deadline, we've talked about whether or not this was the right move by Drury to not make the trade when he wasn't getting what he wanted in return for it. Not just because it just wasn't enough, but also because I think other GMs were playing a game of chicken with Chris Drury, and it was very important for him not to swerve. So I think you got to move Trocheck. In that circumstance, if they get Stenberg or McKenna, you could talk me a little bit more into what is going to be a very stupid contract that somebody is going to give to Alex Tuck. You're going to have plenty of cap space in order to do that, and adding McKenna or Stenberg in that situation. Also, because my other concern, like, I can buy JT Miller as a second line center. I still think that it's insufficient in terms of center depth. But I'm standing by my piece of analysis that I've had for a long time now, that Vincent Trocheck is a third line center. And I just don't love the idea of him being a glorified second line center in that understanding. So for all of those reasons, I still think that you trade Vincent Trocheck because the return is going to be too good. And maybe you entertain signing somebody like Alex Tuck, but I still think you can make a pretty credible argument against doing that too.
I think based on what happened when the Rangers landed Kako and Lafreniere, I don't know that they would do it.
Yeah, I agree.
As for how to get Gabe onto the first power play unit if they don't trade Trocheck, it won't happen. He's going to be on the second power play unit.
Nicole, yeah, to answer that part of the question, which I kind of forgot about, this is going to be really one of those Mike Sullivan choice kind of things that I really need to see at the beginning of next season. Gabe needs to be on the first power play unit. It's going to become the new why isn't Laugh on power play one. I'm already annoyed about it, but I'm going to hold out hope that maybe next year after an off season, things shake out differently. It will be Trocheck. Ideally, will be gone, and you could have an opening there. So we will see. Also from Nicole Vitale. What do you see as the ceiling and floor for this team next season? Now, of course, we will have plenty of next season preview stuff coming at the end of summer, but I look, the floor for this team is exactly where it is right now. The floor for this team is last place in the Eastern Conference because you can't dig any deeper. The ceiling for this team next year, the ceiling, I think, is a wild card spot, probably the second wild card spot. More likely, I would say a success next year would be if this were a team that finished, within 5 points on the outside of the playoffs. I think that you could view as a success for this team next year.
Yeah, I agree with you about the floor. In terms of the ceiling, I don't know. I mean, there's too many variables. Who's going to be on the roster? Is Trocheck going to be here? Um, are- where are they drafting? Are Borgen and Schneider going to be here? What does Fox say he wants to do after the season? There are too many things up in the air right now for me to know what the ceiling's going to look like. Um, it could be anything from if the ceiling is if the Rangers tear down more, the ceiling is sixth place. If the Rangers go the direction of the Pittsburgh Penguins, second place. There's too many variables.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's hard to predict the ceiling, but we're here for nothing else than to predict things that are almost certainly going to be wrong. I think the ceiling for this team is a wild card next year, and again, that is the ceiling. I don't think that they get there. One more from Nicole. So let's say Braden Schneider is gone, maybe even Borgen. Who is playing D for this team next year? Any interesting cheap vet free agents that they could sign to a 1-year deal, similar to a Nate Schmidt in Florida last season? So part of the answer to this could potentially be if they finish, not finish, but if they get where they finish in terms of lottery odds and they get the 3rd overall pick, the likelihood there that the best player available is a defenseman is pretty high. So there's a possibility that that is one of your options. Of course, Fortescue is going to be, I think you can pencil him in. There's, of course, the possibility that Vincent Iorio is also somebody that they could throw out there. There is also Scott Morrow. Jackson Dorrington, I think, had a pretty good season, all things considered, for the Hartford Wolfpack. That is a possibility as well. But I think, as we've discussed, there's not a lot available out there on the free agent market. I'll look up some of the possible defensemen who are available here, but I don't know that that's where you really are going to want to go shopping for defensemen. Again, with the understanding that this is not a high ceiling season next year. I don't know how much it truly matters, but there is the possibility, of course, that they could sign unrestricted free agent Jacob Trouba.
Unrestricted free agent Carson Soucy.
That's also a possibility.
I think the left side is probably more set. You're going to have Gavrikov. Matthew Robertson has solidified at least one of those spots. Drew Fortescue is probably there unless maybe a trade that involves Trocheck or Borgen brings in a higher upside left side defenseman. The right side is the right side's more questionable. The only players in the system right now, you could slot in would be Morrow and Iorio. Behind right side defense is a tough spot. I think even if they drafted Keaton Verhoff, he probably needs to go back to school for another year. Yeah. Again, I'm sure that there are right shot defensemen who are 100 years old and will sign for a 1-year deal. It's not like they're going to be huge upgrades over Schneider or Borgen if those two are traded. But that's not what you're doing. If you're trading Schneider and Borgen, you're either doing it to clear space for Oreo and Morrow, or you're doing it because you're rebuilding and you don't really care that you're just bringing in a vet on a 1-year contract who's going to eat some time.
Keep in mind also that if we assume that Trocheck is going to be traded, we don't know what the return is going to be, and could include a roster defenseman that could plug into the lineup somewhere there. So, Billy Ray, which loser team wins a championship first? Mets, Knicks, Rangers, or Jets?
Good God. It's like Sophie's Choice of New York sports. I'm going to go Rangers. And here's why. The Knicks and the Jets are cursed. They just are. There is some bad juju around those teams. They're never going to win championships. First of all, I don't care about the Jets, but the Knicks, they're never going to win a championship in my lifetime. I've come to that. The Mets, they just suck. They just do. They're less frustrating than the Yankees because the Yankees should be good and they suck, but the Mets just they can't get out of their own way. The Jets are cursed. The Knicks are cursed. The Mets are stupid. The Rangers, the Stanley Cup's a funny thing, and they still have Igor, so I'm going with them.
The only one that I'm certain of in here is that the answer is not the Jets. I agree with you largely about the Mets there. I think the whole Mets situation, to me, I kind of find hilarious that even if it is all a bunch of media and fan created nonsense about how Francisco Lindor is just like absolutely toxic on this team, I find it hilarious because of the just kind of delusional nature of Mets fans on a regular basis. I say that as having two brothers who are Mets fans who are not particularly delusional about the team. But the overlap that I see between Rangers Twitter and Mets Twitter is significant, and the shit talking that often comes from Mets fans that is completely unwarranted and undeserved and unmerited. I find what they go through to be kind of hilarious as a result. So it's down to, I think, the Knicks and the Rangers. I guess look, I'm speaking somewhat out of ignorance here because I'm not an NBA guy. I got to go with the Knicks because they actually do seem to have the closest to the collection of the right kind of players that one needs. And also, the NBA is so weird and fickle that I think what you were saying about the Rangers, about the Stanley Cup being weird, is almost to me more applicable, again, from my very outsider perspective, to the NBA of like, the next thing I know, they could just sign or trade for Thor, God of Thunder, who is going to be their starting center, and they're an unbeatable team. So for that reason, I go with the Knicks. But admit, when it comes to basketball, I have no idea what the fuck.
By the way, as an aside, did you watch the Yankee game last night?
I did not watch the Yankee game last night for reasons that are involved without the benefit of being interesting, having to do with my supposedly free T-Mobile provided subscription to MLB TV that has not been activated yet. So I missed it. But Aaron Boone, like the fucking quote about Ben Rice, they're like, the guy with the best OPS in Major League Baseball. I like the ability to use him one time in a game instead of 3 to 4 times in a game is the dumbest fucking thing I have ever heard. And I would feel bad for Aaron Boone if not for the fact that he's getting paid a shit ton of money to be this willingly stupid and dishonest.
The worst part, and the part where I misplaced my feces, was when in the 6th inning, leading off the inning, down 6-0, Ryan McMahon, who has, I think, 2 more hits than I do this year, tried to lay down a bunt.
Yeah, I saw this.
I'm like, and you look at his face coming off the field, and I'm like, that is a man who gives no fucks. That is a man who was like, I am not going to get on base in this at bat. Why am I even prolonging the pain? Just get me off the field. Ugh. People who think Chris Drury is the worst GM in sports, Brian Cashman might not be the worst, but he is the most inefficient. Let us go on.
Yeah, the Cashman thing is admittedly weird in some way because it's more of he's been around way too long. Because if he would have retired 10 years ago, I think he'd be remembered as one of the best GMs in the history of the league because he was there for the construction of the 90s into the early 2000s dynasty. A couple of teams that went to World Series and went to a World Series and lost one in 2003, won another one in 09. It's another case, though, ultimately, and Chip, I know you know this. It's an ownership thing. It is absolutely an ownership thing. It all comes, the fish rots from Hal Steinbrenner down. Just like the problem is primarily, it is not with Drury, it's with Dolan. Chris Feldman, our own Chris Feldman. Can we talk about how awful the Justin Falk trade was? The fact that Detroit gave up an unprotected first for a 35-year-old just to miss the playoffs again is nuts. That said, should the number one goal on draft day be to trade Braden Schneider for a mid to late 2026 first? Hard to really say that his trade value, what his trade value is, but have to think teams picking later in the draft could be interested in a 24-year-old RFA who can play on that second or third pair. I've talked about this a little. Joe and I talked about it a couple weeks ago. Holy shit. The shine has come completely off of Steve Yzerman. Like, this really was the year to go all in and try to make the deals necessary. The way that I pointed it out is goaltending. I'm going to repeat myself for people who are weekly listeners of the show, so apologies for that. But they traded for John Gibson, and they have Cam Talbot as the veteran, competent backup. They also have Sebastian Casa, who is one of the best goaltending prospects in hockey. And now also in the AHL here in Grand Rapids on the Griffins, they have Trey Augustine, who is one of the other top goaltending prospects. How do you not deal from a position of strength and move one of those two goaltending prospects who, as of right now, cannot crack your lineup to get better? It makes no sense. And I'll let you go on the Dylan Larkin piece of all of this, but he has to be beside himself.
He's got to be furious. And rightfully so. He was pissed last year that they did nothing. And this year they went out and they added Gibson in the offseason and then did nothing to protect, as you said, two other goalie prospects and draft picks. And then they go and give a draft pick away for Justin Falk, who, as Chris rightly points out, that would have been really cool 6 years ago. Not so much today. Steve Yzerman, the Shanna plan failed. The Yzer plan has gone off the rails as well. I don't know what Dylan Larkin does. I would not be at all surprised if he says, get me the fuck out of here. And here's a list of 5 teams, and the Rangers are one of them. I want to go play for Sullivan and go be with JT Miller and do all that. As for Chris's point about getting a pick for Schneider, absolutely. I just looked real quick on Tankathon. Right now, the Seattle Kraken have a second first-round pick midway in the draft. I forget whose it was originally. That would be a good spot for Schneider on Seattle.
Kyle Schnitzer, McKenna or Stenberg?
McKenna.
Yeah, I agree. It's McKenna. Domi versus Probert. I think we've talked about this already, but it's mind-boggling that with one game left, Garan is yet to make his third start. Sully did not want anything to do with a rebuild in Pittsburgh, and based on lineup decisions and usage, he doesn't here either. This is what scares me about Trocheck not being moved. What is your level of concern they might try a quick fix instead of stick to the letter? With due respect, I think this question is all over the place. I don't know that all of these things logically follow from one to another. Garand not getting a third start has a hell of a lot more to do with the fact that we now know, and I'm sure Jonathan Quick had informed the Rangers, even if they didn't make it public until right before the Florida game, that he was going to retire. So they were going to give him the opportunity to play. You still have a healthy Igor Shesterkin, and Garand is, I assume, going to get the opportunity. Well, no, because they got eliminated. So like he may have an opportunity to get another game or two in Hartford before the end of the year, because I know they still have some games to play. Obviously no playoffs for them. So that's the Garan part of it. Sullivan not wanting anything to do with a rebuild in Pittsburgh, I, I just don't know about this, right? So, like, I think that it's also possible that Sullivan just felt that this was like the time for him to move on to something different, that he was spinning his wheels in Pittsburgh, not as much they wanted to go through. And if he really believed in the plan that Kyle Dubas had, it wasn't a rebuild in Pittsburgh, right? Like, it is not what he thought they were going into. So, I don't know that I follow that part of it necessarily either. And I don't know that the lineup decisions and usage tells me that. Like, look, we have agreed Mike Sullivan, one of the better coaches in the National Hockey League. All coaches are flawed. All coaches make decisions that make us go, what the hell are we doing? We talked about this earlier in the fan versus GM thing. Now we're doing a fan versus coach thing, where it's like, well, it's not the choice that I would have made. Okay, that's interesting. We can have an argument about that, but you're not the one making the decisions at the end of the day. And we've criticized some of those decisions. So I don't know that that telegraphs the same thing to me that it's necessarily telegraphing to the person asking this question. This is what scares me about Trocheck not being moved. Again, I think he is still being moved. And I don't buy that they're going to go for the quick fix any more than they actually meant retool when they said retool. I think they're going to try to be competitive sooner rather than later, which in the original letter era was a couple of seasons. I think what they're really trying to say is like, this is not going to be a Blackhawks 9 years later and we're still trying to make the playoffs.
Right. And like we talked about earlier, could landing McKenna or Stenberg change that calculus and
Sure.
and have them want to move a little bit quicker? Yes. As it should, by the way. If you get an injection of that kind of talent into your roster and you see obvious ways that you can be competitive next year, like we talked about, you want to keep your job. How do you keep your job? Sports is a result business. You will keep your job by trying to win. So if you see a way that you have infused some young talent in your team and you can raise that ceiling from, as you said, the second wild card to maybe, winning your conference, you do it. That is your job as GM, right? It is not to say, well, you know what? I sent out this letter about, how we're going to do a retool and it's going to take maybe a year or two. I'm going to stick to that even in the face of new evidence. No, it's you evolve as the situation evolves around you. So I'm not worried about that. I agree with you. Garan starting, not a big deal. Trocheck, I do think ultimately gets moved, even though I posed the question about whether or not they'll do it. I do think he gets moved for all the reasons you've said. And Sullivan, it could very well be that Sullivan just wanted to go to New York. The Rangers offered him a buttload of money and control and term. And Sidney Crosby's getting to be 100 years old. And Erik Karlsson's 100 years old. And Chris Letang and Geno Malkin, they're all 100 years old. And he's been there forever. And maybe he just wanted to move on. And here was a time where Peter Laviolette was going. They had an opening. It fit.
Yep. And you know that he and Drury had talked. So it's I don't buy the Pittsburgh narrative part of it as much. Cronus, I'm going to read this question just to note that the question is, assuming the Rangers don't get the first or second pick, what trades do you want to see before or on draft day? We will have so much more content coming on this on the site leading up to it. So I'm going to just save that question to be answered in that content. At least any more answers than what we have talked about here, which is Trocheck and Schneider, and we've already talked about that. Dimka448. Do you really think Panarin is the one who was holding Lafreniere back? Look, I'll answer that this way. I think that there is a dumb and a smart version of that. The dumb version of it is kind of how it sounds on its face. That, Panarin is holding back Lafreniere in a way like Lafreniere just couldn't be good with Artemi Panarin, even though Panarin is like one of the most talented players in the league and otherwise makes players around him better. I think there's a dumb version of that. I think the smart version of that is to say, Alexi Lafreniere was a young guy playing on a line with one of the most talented players in the league and was incredibly deferential to Artemi Panarin. And now, without having Panarin on the same line with him, is less deferential. And as other people have pointed out, Lafreniere was used to being the guy everywhere that he was. And with Panarin on the roster and coming into a weird situation that we've talked about a lot, which was coming into a Rangers team that was not a basement dwelling team at the time that he was drafted by them, didn't have an opportunity to be the guy. Now, I think it does say something about Lafreniere that he wasn't willing to like assert himself in that situation to be like, no, I still need to play that way, and was willing to be that deferential. Set that all aside, though. I think the fact that he does not have somebody like Panarin on a line with him anymore that he feels he needs to be deferential to has allowed him to emerge as more of the guy. I hope it continues. We need to see it continue to believe in this fully, but I'm glad that it is happening nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree. I think that and the dynamic around how the team plays in general has changed. He's now on a line where he's not looking to get the puck to someone else. He's on a line where someone is looking to get the puck to him. Is a big piece of it, and just the style of play is very different. Alexi Lafreniere, sorry, Artemi Panarin is an amazing talent, and one thing we've heard from a lot of through the years is he freelances a lot, right? He doesn't stick to a structure or anything like that. And so I can imagine it being very difficult to play with him if you're trying to anticipate what he's going to do and you have no fucking clue what he's going to do.
Unless
And
you just have
now
that chemistry. Unless
yes,
you
unless you
just
just have the chemistry.
and that happens sometimes with lines and with hockey players that you just have a chemistry with a guy like that. But if you don't, I imagine you're correct.
Yeah, and he's it's a completely different dynamic for him now. He's not, Trocheck's not a center anymore. Mika is. Gabe is passing him the puck in spots where Trocheck had normally been playing on that line. And so I think you're seeing you're just it's an apples to oranges thing. It's not that Panarin was holding Lafreniere back. It's that Lafreniere wasn't good or as good with Panarin here. And one has very little to do with the other. It's like, you know, do, does the sun come up because the rooster crows? No, it does not.
84 Jorts. Do you watch the playoffs without the Rangers? And if so, who are you rooting for this year?
I do, and I'm rooting for the LA Kings to at least win one round so that we get a
Yes.
second round pick. I'm rooting for I don't really care. I think I'm not rooting for anybody, and that's what makes watching the playoffs without the Rangers in it um, more fun for me, in a sense, in that I can watch a game 7 go to double overtime, and I'm not clutching my chest halfway through it
Yeah.
on every shot.
Yeah.
I can just enjoy good hockey at a high level.
The answer is I will watch the playoffs. I won't be watching a game every single night or every game that's on every night, of course, but I will watch some of it, and I'll watch the Stanley Cup final, no matter who is in it. And it's not so much a who am I rooting for, is that there is a reverse hierarchical list of who I do not want to win, and we work from there in descending order. You can probably guess most of those teams. I will only point one of them out because Steve M in the comments here answered Philly. Steve, get out.
Yeah, go
Get
away.
out.
You know what? I will root for Vegas because I've been trolling Toronto for over a year now, and I
Oh,
want to see
yeah.
Mitch Marner raise a cup. I
Yeah, that
want
would
to
be
see Mitch Marner raise the
amazing.
cup.
That would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Last question. Statesboro Blueshirt CT. No quit. No bullshit. Next year, no slogan.
101. That's the slogan.
One. I look, it will never not be funny to me in a very dark and dour kind of way that the year the Rangers dropped no quit in New York as their slogan, the team quit. There was the only thing holding it up. It was the keystone of that entire Rangers team. And the minute they were like, oh, they didn't tell us not to quit. Well, I guess we fucking quit now.
I still think that the Rangers looked at how bad the Giants played in their centennial season last year and thought, this is just what you're supposed to do. You're supposed, you're supposed to make your centennial season a real shit stain so that everybody remembers how awful it was.
Blueshirtbanter.com, $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free New York Rangers access. Of course, by the time you're listening to this episode, the Rangers will have played their final game of the regular season against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Ideally, it will be a loss. There is a very decent possibility the Lightning will also ice as close to an AHL lineup as they can because they have already clinched home ice in the first round of the playoffs. So all things, if they have gone to plan, the Rangers have lost. And they have the third best odds for the first overall draft pick in the upcoming draft lottery. Plenty of coverage that is going to be upcoming. As I noted, player report cards are going to be starting soon. A lot of end of season coverage. We will have coverage of breakup day, which I'm expecting to be on Monday of next week. We don't know for sure yet, but based on the history, we could expect it to be. I think you're going to get not only on Sunday will you get Phil's Media Bites column, you will probably get one midweek next week as well with a lot of what comes out of breakup day. So a whole lot coming up. You're going to want to read all of that. Again, $85 a year gets you all of your ad-free New York Rangers coverage at blueshirtbanter.com.
All right. Who do you, on breakup day, what will be the one injury that's going to come up that we're going to hear about on breakup day that you're going to be shocked by?
Oh, that I'm going to be shocked by? I don't know that I have an answer for that one. Okay. I think we are going to find out, or that we didn't get it in this Vince interview with JT Miller. I think we're going to find out that JT Miller's groin was hanging by a thread at the beginning of the season, and he forced himself into the lineup anyway. That it's not going to it's not going to shock me, but it's still going to be like, hey, what the hell are we doing? Yeah, it's going to drive me nuts.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
All
right. That's it. That's us. That's it for us in this episode. In the words of one Joe Fortunato, who may or may not return next week. We'll see if he gets off that boat. Bye for now.